The Louisville Cardinals will defeat the Kentucky Wildcats in the Governor's Cup if. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're going to talk about keys to victory for the Cardinals on Saturday afternoon, from getting the passing game going, from limiting big plays on defense, so on and so forth. So with that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Happy Thanksgiving. Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team, every day. On today's episode of the show, it's all about talking about the keys to victory for the Cardinals against the Kentucky Wildcats in the regular season finale, from getting the passing game going to limiting big plays for the Kentucky offense and getting into the opposing backfield. There's a lot that the Louisville Cardinals need to do well this weekend in Lexington. We'll begin by discussing the offensive side of the ball. Just a programming note. Obviously, it's Thanksgiving today. This show is being recorded on Tuesday evening, so obviously things aren't necessarily going to be talked about if they indeed come out after this podcast has been recorded. So one of the big question marks going into this game is who's going to start at quarterback for the Cardinals. Now, it seemed like it was going to be Brock Doman after Malik Cunningham missed the matchup against NC State. Scott Satterfield says on Tuesday afternoon that he is optimistic that Malik Cunningham will play against the Wildcats on Saturday. Noted that he was going to be practicing in some sort of fashion throughout the early portion of the week. I'm not sure what that entails, but regardless, obviously that is good news for Louisville moving forward. I think that Malik Cunningham, in my opinion, gives the Cardinals the best chance to win this game when you factor in, the run pass option, so on and so forth. It adds a whole different dynamic with Malik Cunningham on the field because defenses have to make sure they are aware of where he is at all times, because he is very, very solid of making plays happen when plays break down, so on and so forth. So, look, I think that this is going to be an instance to where the passing game needs to get going regardless of who is starting at quarterback, because I think it directly affects the rushing attack as well. Now, the passing attack is or has been pretty lackluster throughout the season. It's had its moments, but still throughout the whole season, it hasn't necessarily lived up to the expectations or the perception of what the passing game was going to be like before the season. Now, there have been some injuries to skill positions, obviously quarterback injuries, so on and so forth, play calling issues, whatever you're pointing your finger at. Regardless, look, I think that it's pretty obvious that the Cardinals passing attack has been struggling. And I think that last week, and honestly the past 2 weeks against Clemson and NC State, show that when the passing game is struggling, the offense stalls out. Your rushing attack becomes a little less potent because defenses are able to basically load the box and force you to throw the football when you're not throwing it well. So I think Louisville needs to, do well passing the football, but also making sure that it's early on in the game. When you look at this rivalry in particular over the past handful of seasons, it seems like Louisville has pretty much scored. I think actually Louisville has scored on all three of their first drives of the game in each of the past three matchups dating back to 2018. But after that, the team has not been able to continue that offensive momentum. I think that not only does Louisville need to start out solid, but they need to continue that. They need to make the adjustments and continue to impose their will on offense in the first half. Look, I think that this is probably, when you look at the past three matchups, 2018, 19, and 2021. This is probably the worst Kentucky team of the past 4 years that the Cardinals will have played. Now, granted, that is not meant as a token of disrespect. I think that, they're still pretty solid despite struggling against certain teams. It's a very winnable game for Kentucky, and if Louisville is not careful, the Kentucky defense is going to make it tough for the Cardinals offense. They still have some very, very solid players on that defense in the secondary. Obviously, we talked about De'Aaron Jackson on the Players to Watch episode. Obviously, if DeAndre Square is able to play, that is huge news for Kentucky. The senior linebacker has a ton of experience in this rivalry. So that's one to watch for when it comes to injury news, so on and so forth. But the passing attack, whether it's Brock Doman, whether it's Malik Cunningham, it doesn't matter. The passing attack has to get going. Now, some of that's on play calling. You cannot get vanilla with your play calling. It can't be predictable. I understand, you wanting to try to establish the run, but it's counterproductive when the defense knows exactly what you're doing, running the ball on first and second down and putting yourself in third and long situations. I think limiting as many third down and long situations as you can is going to bode well for success for the Cardinals offense. Getting the playmakers the ball out in space. Look, this isn't a Cardinals offense that's going to throw the ball all over the field. That's not their MO on offense, right? It doesn't seem like the Cardinals have that home run threat that can just go down the field and catch an out route like a Tutu Atwell or a Tyler Harrell. I think Amari Huggins-Bruce and Braden Smith could be, in certain packages, but it hasn't shown to be the case this season. Now, what does that mean? It means that Louisville needs to not shy away from what their strengths are, getting the playmakers the ball out in space and letting them make plays. And obviously having Malik Cunningham, that adds a whole different dynamic in the passing game because you have the run-pass option. But Brock Doman, it becomes a little bit more challenging because teams don't necessarily have to focus on Doman running as much as Malik Cunningham. So, regardless of who's playing, I expect a good amount of play action passes where the quarterback is at least rolling out into the flat and trying to make a play, 8 to 10, 15 yards downfield in the intermediate area of the field. I think that is Louisville's bread and butter play, the slant routes, the curls toward the middle of the field, so on and so forth. But regardless, I would like to see it made an emphasis early on to get the ball to Tyler Hudson, to Marshawn Ford, to Amari Huggins-Bruce, Braden Smith, and letting them make plays, because I think that if the passing game struggles, it's going to directly affect the rushing attack as well. And I understand that Louisville is trying to establish the run. They've been doing that pretty much every game since Scott Satterfield took over at Louisville, and that is what it is. It's fine. That's the identity of the offense. It's run the ball first and build the passing attack off of the establishment of the run. But I think that if you're not able to show a threat in the passing department, then it's going to completely take the rushing attack out of it as well when you allow Kentucky to essentially just wait for you to run the football. They have a respectable enough defense to know what's coming and stop it. So I think that the passing game, or getting the passing game going, is big for that aspect of the game, but also I think for the whole general idea of the offense. I think the overall success of the offense depends on it, because I don't necessarily think that the rushing attack is going to be able to be executed to its fullest unless the passing attack is able to allow it to build off of it. So offensively, regardless of who the quarterback is at this point on Tuesday evening, it seems like Malik Cunningham is probably going to play and be the starter, but regardless, it is not set in stone at this point. So we're going to obviously treat this episode with uncertainty because we truly don't know. So, but for the rest of the show, we'll talk about the defensive side of the ball. The first thing, in my opinion, is limiting the big plays for the Kentucky offense. We'll talk about what that means here in just a second after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at BetOnline. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting needs. Head to the website or use the mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Moving forward into the defensive portion of the show, the Cardinals taking on a Kentucky offense that over the past handful of matchups has really had a ton of success against Scott Satterfield's defenses. Kentucky's offense, most of these players in this offense have played Louisville at least one time. Obviously, quarterback Will Levis had a huge performance in the Governor's Cup last season at Cardinal Stadium. Chris Rodriguez has been a thorn in Louisville's side since coming to Lexington, and the Kentucky offense, regardless of if they struggled in previous weeks, they've had a ton of success against the Cardinals. I think one of the main reasons for that is because Louisville giving up the big plays to Kentucky has allowed that Wildcats offense to really put some points up on the board. Sorry, my nose is absolutely itching. But I think that Kentucky's offense has been struggling here and there. A lot of that is due to the offensive line struggling to protect Will Levis throughout the duration of games. Opposing defenses are really making it tough for the Kentucky offensive line to consistently protect Will Levis. It's essentially like, okay, you gave Levis a clean pocket to make a throw. You gave him a clean pocket to hand it off to a running back and create a lane. Do it again. And do it again. And do it again. And that's kind of what opposing defenses are or how they're essentially treating the Kentucky offense, is they're forcing the offensive line to continue to hold up for Will Levis. Obviously, Kentucky, over the course of the season, that offense has been most dangerous when they are hitting on their big plays, and they have a ton of playmakers that allow that offense to do just that. Obviously, the rushing attack is going to be crucial. I'm not expecting the Cardinals to absolutely shut down Kentucky in that category. I'm not sure if Kavasier Smoke is going to be playing in this game. I know he's been battling injury throughout the month of November, but Juton McClain is a solid backup. But Chris Rodriguez averaging 5 yards per carry, 784 yards on the season, 6 touchdowns, which is impressive considering that he missed the first handful of games this season. Rodriguez is going to be pretty much the X factor, in my opinion, because I think that if he has a huge game, it could definitely spell trouble for the Louisville defense. This is a Louisville defense that has really, really stepped up over the past, couple games, and they have done well with solid rushing attacks from previous opponents. Israel Abanikanda at Pittsburgh, a very, very solid running back. Outside of a couple of chunk yardage plays, they pretty much kept him in check. They have to do the same thing for Chris Rodriguez here, because if you allow him to get a big yardage of 20 yards and more and being able to move down the field, it can definitely spell disaster for the Kentucky offense. Look, I think it's a matter of making Kentucky uncomfortable and forcing that offense to consistently move down the field and get first down after first down. If they're going to score. It's basically, okay, make them get 10 yards at a time. Make them play multiple downs in a series and force them to convert on third downs, and don't allow them to just take chunk yardage down the field and go 15 yards down the field at a time. Force them to execute over and over. Force that offensive line to protect Will Levis over and over. I think that pertains to the passing game as well. Obviously, there is a much important emphasis on trying to keep the rushing attack in check for obvious reasons, especially with Will Levis, because we saw Levis turn from not really a threat to run the football to a guy that was scoring 4 touchdowns on the ground last year. So you have to obviously respect that portion of Levis's game, but a different offensive line for Kentucky just a year later, so that definitely changes how Kentucky's offense is handled. No Liam Cohen as well. There has been a lot of complaints surrounding the play calling for Kentucky, but I think it sometimes can be hard, especially with an offensive line that is underperforming. But regardless, if they give Will Levis a clean pocket or enough time to throw the football, it's going to be tough to limit the skilled positions because Kentucky has a very, very solid wide receiving group. We talked about Barryon Brown, in my opinion, one of, if not the most explosive wide receivers in the SEC. One of the quickest and fastest players in the conference and in the country as well. Is going to be essentially this year's Wan'Dale Robinson in the matter of, okay, know where he is on the field at all times and do not give him a ton of space to operate, because if you do, it could definitely spell disaster. Not only do they have Barryon Brown, but Tavion Robinson, Dane Key, you have tight end Jordan Dingle as well. So I think that those 4 guys are going to be the main receiving core that Louisville needs to focus on. Tavion Robinson had a very strong start to the season and has been a very solid player this season. The senior transfer from Virginia Tech, obviously the freshman from the state of Kentucky, Dane Key, is a big portion of that offense as well. So I think that limiting the big play, forcing Kentucky to go down the field the hard way and convert third downs, and force them to convert third downs to extend drives. I think that that's going to be one of the keys to the game when you talk about how these games have pretty much historically gotten out of hand. 2018, 2019, 2021. There's times where Louisville has done what they've needed to do. Now, granted, defensively, I don't think it's close. I think that this is obviously Scott Satterfield's best defense at Louisville by far, hands down, since he, became the head coach of the Cardinals. But still, you have to limit the big time plays. That's going to be the focus number 1 for me, because it's hard for the offense to play catch up. And in 2021 especially, they had to do that, and it forced them to go out of their offense because they were, in a big deficit early on. 2019, obviously, the weather and the precipitation played a big factor. But still, I think in the second half, chunk yardage from Lynn Bowden and that Kentucky offense. Obviously, we're talking about different styles of play. Obviously, they had to play different with Lynn Bowden. The rushing attack for the Cardinals isn't as bad as it was in 2019, but still, this unit is far from perfect, but they are definitely doing a lot of things better, mainly in the pass rush. That's going to be the third key to the game for me, getting in the opposing backfield, making life tough for Will Levis and the Kentucky ball carriers. We'll talk about that here in just a second. If you are listening to this on certain streaming services, you're going to hear audio implemented advertisements. If not, you are going to not hear those. So just stay tuned. But with it being Thanksgiving, I do want to take this time before we get into the third segment to just say thank you all, and to tell you how thankful I am of every one of you that tunes into the show on whatever streaming service you utilize, that retweets the podcast on Twitter, shares it, likes it, rates it, so on and so forth. We are approaching episode number 300, which will be in the month of December. So that is some big time accomplishment. Very excited for that, but overall just extremely grateful for the support over the past calendar year and some change when the podcast was launched in the month of August back in 2021. So, but to conclude this week's content and this episode of the show, we're talking about the third key to the game, that is getting into the opposing backfield for the Louisville defense. I feel like a broken record when I keep saying this, but I really just think it is that. I think that it's going to be a case to where Louisville is trying to get Kentucky off the field in third and long situations. Obviously, you have to still not allow teams to convert. Louisville has had some struggles with giving up costly penalties, giving up third and long gains, so on and so forth. But this Kentucky offensive line, if they've shown anything all season, it's that they've struggled to protect Will Levis consistently throughout the duration of games. Louisville has to take advantage of that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you are looking to put this Kentucky offense into a situation where we've seen them against teams like Vanderbilt, Georgia, Mississippi, so on and so forth. I don't count the South Carolina game because Will Levis was hurt, but you understand what I'm saying. If you want to put Kentucky into a situation to where they're struggling to score points, they're struggling to move the football, you look at the constant variable that was evident in all three of those losses for Kentucky: quarterback pressure, getting pressure against Will Levis, getting into the opposing backfield. Even if it's not being turned into sacks, you're still forcing Will Levis to make decisions just that much quicker and going through his reads that much quicker, and making it a mental aspect as well, to where, if you're consistently bringing the house, bringing pressure and getting home, and you're putting some pressure on Levis, you're getting to him, whether that's getting sacks or, quarterback hurries, regardless, that can obviously linger in a quarterback's mind of, okay, is my blind side being protected, so on and so forth. But that goes without saying. And I kind of feel not cliche by saying it, but I think it just needs to be said. The pass rush for Louisville has become the identity of this team. The identity of this Louisville defense is everything is based off and build upon or build it on from the pass rush. Getting after the quarterback: Yasir Abdullah, Momo Sanogo, Monty Montgomery, Yaya Diaby, Ashton Gelati, Des Tell. The front seven for Louisville has been extremely dynamic in the second half of the season in getting after opposing quarterbacks. Also, not only getting after quarterbacks, but also getting into the opposing backfield in general and putting, other offenses in unique situations, recording a good amount of tackles for loss. That's going to be critical when you go up against a running back like Chris Rodriguez. Look, he's one of the best running backs in the conference, one of the best in the country, in my opinion. I have always been a huge fan of Chris Rodriguez's game. I think that he is one of those players, kind of reminds me of a Nick Chubb. When you watch him be able to absorb contact and get yards after the first, point of contact. After the first contact is made, he's able to, turn that into more positive yardage, and you can't arm tackle him because he's that strong. I believe he's over 220 pounds, obviously not as dynamic as Nick Chubb. Chubb is one of the best running backs in the NFL. I'm not trying to make that point, but they have a very similar playing style. And I think it's very coincidental that as a freshman, Chubb absolutely torched the Louisville defense in the Belk Bowl back in 2014, I believe. 2014 going into 2015, yes. So, getting into the opposing backfield, trying to blow the plays up at the line of scrimmage, not allowing Chris Rodriguez to get into that second level of the defense because he might not necessarily be the fastest running back, but if you allow him to get into the second level of the defense, he can definitely turn it into big yardage plays. So look, I think that both getting after the quarterback and limiting what Rodriguez is able to do, trying to tackle him closer to the line of scrimmage and not giving him much opportunity to, break tackles, so on and so forth, and essentially getting Kentucky into uncomfortable situations in 3rd and long. That's the third key to the game for me. Obviously, the 3 keys, in my opinion, there's probably more, but Louisville needs to turn in a solid performance because despite Louisville being ranked 25th, that means nothing because Louisville has a lot to prove in this rivalry. They have to come out and perform well. There's no excuses this season. So to perform well, in my opinion, the 3 biggest keys are getting the passing game going, limiting big plays from the Kentucky offense, and getting into the opposing backfield, making life tough for both Will Levis, the Kentucky offensive line, and Chris Rodriguez. So, but that is going to wrap up this Thursday edition of the show. There will be no Friday edition. Obviously, I am out of town at this point. Everyone have a great holiday weekend. Be safe. Go Cards. Take this time to recharge your batteries. Spend some time with your loved ones. Tell people how thankful you are of them, even if you haven't talked to them in a while. Life is just too short. Never leave anything unsaid. So just keep that in mind during this holiday season. But as always, I'm very, very thankful for you all. That's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here next week.